We continue now at the top of Daf Chafam and Beis Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 20b. On the previous summit, the Gemara had a machlokas between Abaya and Rava in terms of how to understand Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said that let's say you have somebody who gets up early before dawn, one of the Kohanim gets up early before dawn in order to do the Trumas Hadeshin. Before he does the Trumas Hadeshin, the removal of the ashes, so he does the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. He sanctifies his hands and his feet by washing his hands and his feet. So Rabbi Yochanan says that in such a situation, after dawn comes, there's a concept of psul lina. Usually we say that lina disqualifies and requires a new kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. And Rabbi Yochanan says that's not the case in this situation. In this particular situation, since already at the beginning of the avoda of the day really is the Trumas Hadeshin, even though that took place before dawn, we say there's no disqualification of lina. And again, the Gemara had in the previous summon a machlokas Abaya and Rava how to understand Rabbi Yochanan. According to Abaya, Rabbi Yochanan follows Rebbe. Rebbe holds in general that any time the dawn comes, you have to do a new sanctification of the hands and the feet. And essentially, Rabbi Yochanan says that in a situation where you're washing your hands right before dawn, so there already Rebbe would admit. That's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying according to Abaya. And Rava says, no, that's not what's going on with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was actually following Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon happens to hold that you do not need a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, even in a situation where the Kohen, let's say, sanctified his hands and feet the day before, the night before, still you would not need a new one. And so the question is, why is Rabbi Yochanan only talking about this situation of doing the Trumas Hadeshin? And the answer to that is that Rabbi Yochanan himself does not really agree fully with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan is saying, I only agree with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon in a situation where the Kohen washed his hands for the Trumas Hadeshin, so it was really right before dawn, but otherwise I would not go so far as Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon to say that if the Kohen did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim the night before, that's going to count for the next day. And on the previous summit, the Gemara brought a Mishnah Meseches Talmud. The Mishnah Meseches Talmud essentially says that the Kohanim at the very beginning of the day, so they would sanctify their hands and their feet, and the assumption is that this is talking about the same Kohanim who had just sanctified their hands and their feet the night before, but they would have to do it again before the dawn when they were getting up at the time of the Trumas Hadeshin, and then that would count for the rest of the day. And so the Gemara now says, B'shalom Ali Abaya, this Mishnah makes perfect sense according to Abaya, to Mukim Lo Rebbe, because again he says that Rabbi Yochanan was following Rebbe, Umodi Rebbe de Mikros HaGever At Safra Lo Pas Lo Lina. And again, Rebbe would admit that from the time the rooster crows until the morning, that little short period of time before dawn until dawn, there we say that Lina is not a disqualification. And so Hamani Rebbe, so who's the author of this Mishnah in Meseches Talmud? Also it's Rebbe. It's exactly the way Abaya understood Rabbi Yochanan, again following the sheet of Rebbe. Ela l'Rava, but according to Rava, Demukim Lo Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, he says that Rabbi Yochanan was really following Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, meaning Rabbi Yochanan was just saying, I agree with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon only in this limited situation where you do it right before dawn, you do the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Avol l'Rebbe, but according to Rebbe, within Rava's interpretation, Mikros HaGever At Safra Pas Lo Lina, then we would say from the time the rooster crows until the morning, there would still be a disqualification of Lina. There's no exceptions. When the morning comes, there's that disqualification. They have to do a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So then Hamani, so now who's the author of this Mishnah Meseches Talmud? Rebbe, if you're going to say follows Rebbe, Pas Lo Lina, so the Lina should be a disqualification. They need to wash again. And Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, and if it's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Ha'amar, but Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon himself says, Afilu mikan v'yarasar yamim eino tzarich l'kadesh. Even 10 days from now, if the Kohen is doing the avodah for 10 days with no hesach hadas, he never needs a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Again, this Mishnah seems to imply that he does. And so the Gemara continues and answers, Liolam Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Really, this Mishnah in Talmud is following Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, and you're just misunderstanding the Mishnah. Here, the Mishnah is talking about new Kohanim. They didn't wash the night before, and that's why, of course, they have to wash at the beginning of the day. Had they washed their hands, had they done a Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim the night before with no Hesach Hadas, they would not need to wash again. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. They had the following question: Yitzia, what if the Kohen exits the Azara? Mahu shetoel b'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Is that effective in terms of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? Im Tim Salomar, if you say Lina lo pasla de lo parish, so by Lina we say when the new day comes, we say it's not a disqualification because he hasn't separated from the avoda. Avol Yitzia, but if he actually exits the Azara de parish where he's really separating, Asuche Mesach Daite, that's like a Hesach Hadas, and then he would need a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Odilmur maybe Kaven Deviyado Lachser, since he's able to return lo masech, that's not really a Hesach Hadas. It's not turning his attention away from the avoda. And Rashi explains, Yitzia chutz la'azara, again leaving the azara, leaving the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Ma'u shatoel, would it be effective to require now a new kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? Kederech shaposel b'chol hakachim. We find that leaving is a disqualification by all other kachim, shekidshu b'kli sharis, which are sanctified in kli sharis. The halach is shem yotzu nifsalin b'yotzei. There's an idea of psul yotzei, an idea of disqualification from leaving the azara, and so that's the question over here. And again, the Gemara said, if you're going to say that lina is not a disqualification, that's because the lo parish, lo nivdal me avoda. In that situation, he didn't separate from the avoda. There was no hesach hadas, but maybe already yitzia leaving, that's already going to be considered a hesach hadas, and therefore new kiddush yadayim v'raglayim would be needed. Or maybe we say no, since it's biyad olachzor, even in that situation, a new kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is not necessary. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Brisa, Kidei sheyada v'raglav, let's say he sanctifies his hands and his feet, v'nitmu, and then they become tameh, matvilon, so he immerses them, meaning he just washes the hands alone, ve'ein sarech l'kadesh, he does not need to do a new sanctification. Yatsu, let's say they leave, harehin b'kedushasan, so then they remain in their kedusha. And the Gemara says to that, Yatsu yadav lo kami boilan. That's true. If only his hands would leave the azar, that's not a question. We understand they would still be biktushasan, but ki kami boilan yatsa kol gufo mai. The question is when his whole body leaves. But enochinami, if it's just his hands leave the azara, that would not be a reason to require a new sanctification of the hands and the feet. And Rashi explains, v'nitmu, again he becomes tameh hayadayim. We're talking specifically about the hands becoming tameh. B'davar shein tumasu min haTorah. This is talking about something where the tumah is not doraisa. This is tumas yadayim, which is derabonan. Sheyitma gufo, by a tumah doraisa, his whole body would be tameh. But here we're talking ela bepigel o benoser shashanina bepsachim shemetamim es yadayim. We're talking, let's say, with pigel or noser, which we say in psachim that is metame, the hands, so some kind of tumah miderabonan. So the Brisa said matvilan es yadayim levad, and you immerse just the hands, and that will be sufficient. There's no requirement to be mekadesh again. And yatsu yadav, let's say his hands exit shahoshitan lachutz, he sticks them outside of the azara, so there's no requirement. And again, the Gemara said yatsu yadav is not a question. The whole question is yatsu kol gufo. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof, also a brisa, shelo rachutz yadayim v'raglayim, he didn't wash his hands and his feet, mekadesh b'kli sharis bifnim, he sanctifies with the kli sharis inside, kidesh b'kli sharis b'chutz, if he sanctifies with the kli sharis outside, o b'kli chol bifnim, or with a regular vessel inside, o shataval b'mei ma'aro, or let's say he immerses in the waters of a cave, v'avad, and he does the avodaso psula, so then his avoda is disqualified. And Rashi explains, Mekadesh b'kli shares, he's Mekadesh with the kli shares o kior. What it means is as follows. If you're going to have to do a sanctification of the hands and the feet, you can use a kli shares or the kior. O kli shares acher. You could also use another kli shares. In other words, the Brisa is saying, if you have a Kohen who didn't wash his hands and his feet, so you really have an option whether to use the kior or you could just use a kli shares bifnim, that is sufficient. The marvino lekamon b'shmaitin kol kli shares lekiddush. We're going to include later on in the sugya all kli shares is fine for the sanctification. Bifnim, again, so it says, if he's going to do it inside, shayru hukvu lo mokom ba'azara, you're supposed to do it in the azara specifically, techsiv v'nasat sakir, it says that's where you place the kior, v'asum ksiv v'rachatzu mimenu, that's where it says v'rachatzu mimenu, b'kli chol, if he doesn't use a kli shares, let's say he just uses a kli chol, pasul, that's disqualified, the rachatzu mimenu ksiv, it says mimenu, from it he has to wash, v'chi yisrabu shar kelim l'kamon, dum yodidei yisrabu, it has to be similar to the kior, and so therefore, essentially, the Brisa is saying you have to wash with a kli shares inside the azara, and it's not going to be okay to wash outside of the azara. It's not going to be okay to use a kli chol that's inside the azara. And then the Brisa also said, "Oshataval b'mei ma'ara." Let's say he immerses in the waters of a cave. Shein kasherin l'tvila. Those are kosher for immersion. V'uadin l'mayim chayim. The same would be, let's say, a flowing stream of water, a natural stream. Ela sharov tvilos b'mayim mechunasim. But generally speaking, it's gathered water that you immerse in. Avodaso psula. So that's again the avoda is disqualified. V'lo and tvila davar chashav. We don't say the immersion is a chashav, is an important kind of immersion. We don't say that is a good substitute for the kiddush, for the sanctification of the hands and the feet. And the Gemara continues and brings its proof from the Brisa, Taima de Kiddush b'chli sharis b'chutz. The reason why the sanctification would not be good is because he did it with the kli sharis outside of the Azara. HaKiddush b'fnim, but if he sanctified inside the Azara, v'yotza, and then he left, avodasu kasher, the implication is that the avoda would be kosher, and that shows that leaving does not require a new Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. But the Gemara continues and says, no, Dilma may be Kiddush b'chli sharis b'chutz. What does it mean when he sanctifies the kli sharis outside the Azara? Hechi dami, what are we talking about? Kagon da'apik yodov levar v'kiddush. The case would actually be where he stuck his hands out and sanctified in that manner. Again, avol yotza kol gufo tiboilach. But if his entire body left, so that actually would still be a question. And Rashi explains, Hakidesh b'fnim v'yotza kasher, and if he sanctified inside and left, apparently it would be kosher. Disal kadaitach psula, because if that was disqualified, hashta kidesh b'fnim v'yotza psula. If sanctifying inside and leaving is disqualified, kidesh b'chutz mi boy, do you even need to say sanctifying outside is a problem? V'chayesh yitzia gedola mizu, is there anything more leaving than that? Umeshani, the Gemara answers, Dilma Kiddush b'chutz did strichlei l'tana l'misni de psula. Maybe the Tana needs to teach that Kiddush b'chutz is disqualified. Could go into apik yodei levar, the cases where the hands are outside, the gufe b'fnim, and the body is inside. The Kiddush, and he sanctifies in that manner. The ilu Kiddush b'fnim v'hotzi yodav, and then we can infer that if he would sanctify inside and stick his hands out, Tanya el harein b'kedushasam, that actually would be fine. They would still be considered sanctified. Avol yotza gufo lo tiduk minoi, but you can't make any inference in terms of his entire body leaving. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rev Zvid le Rev Papa. Rev Zvid said to Rev Papa, Tashma, come and hear a proof from the following brisa. Yotza chutz lemechitzas chomas v'azara, if he leaves the wall of the Azara, im lishos, if he leaves for some amount of time, for a length of time, toan tevila, so then he requires immersion. Im lefisha, but if he just leaves for a small amount of time, toan kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, so then he needs to sanctify the hands and the feet. Amar le, so he said back to him, Hacha b'mayaskin, and here what is the case? Kagon sheyotza lahosech raglav ulahatel mayim. The case is he's leaving to defecate or he's leaving to urinate. The idea is that if he leaves to defecate, so then he's going to need immersion. If he leaves to urinate, so then he's going to need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and that would have no proof, therefore, that simply leaving would cause a requirement for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. But the Gemara continues, Ha behedya katani la, but if that's what it's teaching us, but that's already taught in the Mishnah. It says, Kol ha-mesech raglav ton tvila, anybody who defecates needs immersion. V'chol ha-matil mayim ton kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, if one urinates, so then he needs sanctification of the hands and the feet. And the Gemara says to that, Tani v'hader mefarish, it was taught, and now it is being explained, it's being elaborated upon. And the Gemara continues, Im lahashos ton tvila, if he leaves for a longer period of time, he needs immersion. Kasal kadaitach, initially the Gemara thinks, Misham hesachadas, this is because he turned his attention away from the avoda. The Gemara then answers, Hachav mayaskin, on here, what are we talking about? The katani im lishos ton tvila, it says that if he delays, he requires immersion. Sheyotza lahasech raglav, we're talking about a situation where he leaves to defecate legedolim, that means he's leaving to defecate, with the chavase seifa, the katani im lefisha ton kiddush, and when it says at the end that if he leaves momentarily he needs sanctification, sheyotza lahatil mayim, that's just talking about going to urinate. The amrina b'seder yuma, because we say Meseches yuma, mitzvah l'shaf sheif b'yodo nitzotzel shal gabe raglav shalo yira kechrus shifcha, he's got to wash off whatever amount of drops are upon his feet. He shouldn't look like a chrus shifcha, somebody who is injured in that area. Lafikach tzarich l'kadesh yodav raglav, therefore he needs to sanctify his hands and his feet. But the Gemara again asked, Behedya katanila, but that's explicit. Beseifa da'ahi, the Rashi says that's explicit as this brisa goes on. And though Rashi is indicating that this line of kol ha-mesech raglav, etc., is the end of the very same brisa, many point out again that this is a Mishnah in Meseches Yuma. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come and hear the following proof, para, with regards to the para aduma. Rashi explains, para ba'avodas para aduma. This is the avod of the para aduma. Shaya chutz li Yerushalayim bar HaMishcha, was outside of Yerushalayim on Har HaMishcha. So with regards to that, there's a machlokas amoroim. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef amar mekadesh b'chlishares b'fnim v'yotzer. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef says he sanctifies with klishares inside the Beis HaMikdash, and then he goes out and does para aduma. For Rabbi Yochanan amar, Rabbi Yochanan says afila b'chutz, he can even do it outside the Mikdash. V'afila b'chlichol, even with a regular vessel, even if it's not a klishares. V'afila b'makida shel cheres, even with an earthenware bowl. All of that is fine. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar of Papa, Rav Papa says, Shani par, it's different by the par aduma, you can't bring any proof. Hoel v'chol maseh b'chutz lo pasla ba, since everything is done outside, so therefore lo pasla ba yitzia, therefore leaving is not going to be a disqualification. Rashi explains, v'yotze, again it said that he's mekadesh with the chlisharis and then he leaves. Alma lo pasla yitzia, so the Gemara thinks it's a proof. You see that yitzia, that leaving is not a disqualification, b'kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, when it comes to sanctification of the hands and the feet. And again, Rav Papa then answers, it's different by par aduma because everything is done outside of the mikdash, and therefore yitzia is not a disqualification. But the Gemara continues, if so, lama li de mekadesh, what's the point of even sanctifying at all? And the Gemara says to that, ke'ein avoda pnim, it should be similar to the avoda that's done inside the mikdash. And the Gemara continues, who they had the following question. Tumma ma'u shatoa l'kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. What about tumma? What does that do in terms of the sanctification of the hands and the feet? Is that effective in the sense that you would need to do a new kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? Rashi explains, tumma kasal kadaydach nitmu yadav. Right now we think it means his hands become tameh. V'lo gufa, we're not talking about his whole body. Kami boile. That's the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues and clarifies, im tim solomer yitzia lo pasla. If you're going to say that leaving the mikdash is not a disqualification, de gavra chazi. That's because the person is still fit to do the avoda. Avalacha de gavra lo chazi, but here where the person is not even fit, asuchim mesechet, he's certainly turning his attention away from the avoda. Odilmar maybe kevan de hadar chazi dok levelo mesechet, since he again will become fit, he's able to become fit, so that's not considered to be a hesach hadas. Rashi explains, if you're going to say that leaving is not a disqualification, the person is able, the reason why it's not a disqualification is because the person is able to return and enter. So he's not turning his attention away. The hesach hadas doesn't disqualify the sanctification. Since he can immerse and then he'll be fit again, if he's going to be careful, he won't touch anything dirty. He's not going to have any hesach hadas. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following brisa, Kidesh Yodav Araglav, if he sanctifies his hands and his feet, Vinitmu, and then they become Tameh, Matvilan, he immerses them, V'ein Sarach L'Kadesh, he doesn't need to sanctify again, so it seems that no new sanctification is needed by a situation of Tumah of the hands. And the Gemara continues and answers, Nitmu Yodav Lomi Boilan. Actually, if his hands become Tameh, that's not a question. We understand that a new sanctification is not needed in that case. Kimi Boilon, when do we have a question? Nitma Kol Gufo. The question is, when his whole body becomes tameh. The Gemara says, Kol Gufo, what do you mean his whole body? Typically, Kavan de Boy Lemevet Hariv Shemesh, in a situation where his whole body is tameh, so then already we should say, since he needs to wait for the evening to be pure, Asuchi Mesach Daite, certainly he's turned his attention away from the avoda. And the Gemara says to that, not necessarily kagon de itmi samuch l'shkias hachama. Maybe the case is he became tameh right near sunset, so he didn't have a hesach hadas. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof, para with regards to the para aduma, the machlokas amoraim we just quoted above. Rabbi Chiba, Rabbi Yosef, Amar Mekadesh b'chli shares b'fnim v'yotzei. Rabbi Chiba, Rabbi Yosef says he sanctifies with a kli shares inside and goes out. Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu b'chutz v'afilu b'chli chol v'afilu b'mekida shel cheres. Rabbi Yochanan says he can even sanctify outside. He can even use a kli chol, a mundane vessel. He can even use an earthenware bowl. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph.